I opened a manila folder at my family's Thanksgiving table and read one paragraph that made 6 adults forget their rehearsed speeches. Not shout, not argue, forget. The room went so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. My father looked down at his plate. My mother stopped reaching for her coffee. My brother set his fork on the table and never picked it up again. And the person who had spent 3 years slowly pushing me out of my own family realized, for the first time, that I had been paying attention. The strange thing is that none of this started at Thanksgiving. It started 8 months earlier. It started with a family trip. It started with a bedroom. Or more accurately, the lack of one. At the time, it seemed small, embarrassing, easy to explain away. By Thanksgiving, it would become impossible to ignore. And by the end of that dinner, everything in our family would be measured differently. Not by feelings, by facts. Not by promises, by paperwork. Welcome back to reality drama story where family secrets unfold and quiet decisions change everything. If you are new here, drop a comment and subscribe. Now let's get into it. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 36 years old. I work as a commercial architect in Charlotte, North Carolina. Most days I spend my time reviewing blueprints, calculating loads, checking dimensions, and fixing mistakes before they become disasters. It's a job that teaches you something important. Structures rarely collapse suddenly. They fail because of small cracks nobody wants to address. Families aren't very different. The first person who taught me that was my grandfather. His name was Walter Bennett. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He owned a small construction company and spent 40 years building houses across 3 counties. When I was 10 years old, he'd take me to job sites on Saturdays. Other kids went to amusement parks. I carried measuring tapes. I loved it. Grandpa would stand beside unfinished foundations and tell me things that sounded simple at the time. A house tells the truth eventually. I never forgot that sentence. Crooked beams, weak concrete, missing supports. Eventually the truth appears. You can hide problems. You can't erase them. When Grandpa died, I was 28. The funeral was packed. Former employees, neighbors, friends, people whose homes he'd built decades earlier. Everyone talked about his generosity. Everyone talked about his honesty. What nobody talked about was his estate. At least not publicly. The family assumed everything would pass equally between his children. My father, my aunt, and my uncle. Nobody expected surprises. Especially not me. At the time, I wasn't thinking about inheritance. I was thinking about work, about life, about moving forward. Then came the years that followed, and those years slowly changed everything. My parents were good people. At least that's what I believed. Dad was practical. Mom was warm. My older brother Ryan was charismatic, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with new friends. People loved Ryan. Teachers loved him. Employers loved him. Relatives loved him. He knew exactly how to make people feel important. I admired that for years. But admiration has a way of fading when you start noticing patterns. Ryan always needed help, money, advice, second chances, another opportunity, another rescue. And somehow everyone provided it, especially my parents. When Ryan's first business failed, Dad paid off the debt. When Ryan needed a down payment for a house, Mom helped. When Ryan wanted investors for another venture, family members stepped in. I didn't think much of it. Families help each other. That's normal. But over time I noticed something. Support flowed in one direction, toward Ryan. Always toward Ryan. I wasn't jealous. I had my own career, my own apartment, my own life. I wasn't looking for handouts. I just assumed fairness existed somewhere in the equation. Then came the annual family trip. Every spring our family rented the same lake house. 5 bedrooms. Large deck. Waterfront view. We'd been doing it for nearly a decade. Same location. Same traditions. Same routines. At least until this year. I arrived around 4 in the afternoon. My suitcase was in the trunk. The weather was perfect. 72 degrees. Light breeze. Everything felt normal. Until I walked upstairs. All 4 guest rooms were occupied. Suitcases everywhere. Clothes hanging in closets. Beds already claimed. I stood in the hallway confused. Then I found Mom in the kitchen. "Which room is mine?" She hesitated. Not long. Just enough. That tiny pause architects notice when a wall isn't perfectly straight. "Oh," she said. "We thought you'd be okay with the pull-out couch." I smiled. Because that's what people do when they're surprised. The couch. Ryan walked into the kitchen. "Come on, It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. Interesting phrase. The lake house had 5 bedrooms. 1 belonged to my parents. 1 belonged to Ryan and his wife. 1 belonged to Ryan's teenage son. 1 belonged to Ryan's 8-year-old daughter. 1 belonged to Ryan's mother-in-law. I looked around the room. 5 bedrooms. 6 adults. 2 children. And somehow I was sleeping on a couch. I said nothing. Just nodded. Because sometimes silence tells you more than arguments. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The couch springs dug into my back. People walked through the living room until midnight. Nobody seemed bothered. Nobody apologized. Nobody offered alternatives. And that's when I realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't an accident. It had been discussed. Planned. Accepted. Everyone knew. Except me. The next morning, Ryan's mother-in-law thanked everyone for giving her a private room. Everyone. Not me. Everyone. I remember those exact words. Because they stayed with me. The trip lasted 4 days. By the end, I felt less like a daughter and more like a guest. An optional one. After we returned home, I tried to forget it. But small cracks don't disappear. They spread. 3 months later, Dad announced he was updating estate plans. Normal enough. Parents do that. He mentioned family meetings, financial planning, future arrangements. Again, normal. But then details started emerging. Ryan attended meetings. I didn't. Ryan reviewed documents. I didn't. Ryan knew timelines. I didn't. Whenever I asked questions, answers became vague. Nothing is finalized. We'll discuss it later. Don't worry about it. Architects worry about missing information. It's part of the job, so I paid attention. And what I saw concerned me. Properties were being transferred, business accounts reorganized, trust structures adjusted. Ryan seemed remarkably informed. For someone who supposedly knew nothing. If this story is hitting close, drop a comment and stay with me because what happens next is something none of them were ready for. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, my aunt called. My father's younger sister, Linda. She rarely involved herself in family drama, which made the phone call unusual. "Emily," she said quietly, "have you seen your grandfather's original will recently?" "No." Long pause. "Maybe you should." That was all she said. Then she changed the subject. The conversation lasted less than 6 minutes. But it bothered me. The next day, I visited the county records office. Not because I expected anything dramatic. Just curiosity. The same curiosity that makes engineers inspect a foundation after spotting a crack. I spent 2 hours reviewing documents. Then I found it. A copy of Grandpa Walter's final estate package, dated April 14th. Signed. Witness. recorded. Most people would have skimmed it. I didn't. Page by page, line by line. And then I reached a section marked Contingent Property Transfer Clause. I read it once, then twice, then 3 times. My pulse increased, because buried inside 37 pages of legal language was a very specific provision, one nobody had mentioned, one apparently nobody expected me to discover. Grandpa owned commercial land outside Charlotte, 42 acres. At the time of his death, it wasn't worth much. Now, due to development, zoning changes, new highway access, the property was worth approximately $3.8 million. But ownership wasn't automatic. Grandpa had created conditions, specific conditions. The land would eventually transfer to whichever direct descendant remained actively involved in property management and preservation decisions over a 10-year review period. Not oldest descendant, not favorite descendant, not male descendant, active descendant. There was documentation, attendance records, management participation, meeting minutes, signed acknowledgments, evidence. And suddenly everything made sense. The family meetings, the exclusion, the silence. Ryan wasn't simply receiving information. He was positioning himself as sole participant. The problem? The records showed something interesting. For 7 years, I had attended nearly every preservation meeting with Grandpa before his death. I had helped review plans, signed documents, maintained records. Ryan attended almost none. Grandpa had documented everything, every signature, every date, every meeting, because Grandpa believed paperwork mattered more than promises. And according to those records, the qualifying beneficiary wasn't Ryan. It was me. I made copies. Every page, every signature, every clause. Then I went home and waited. Thanksgiving arrived 12 days later. My parents hosted. 22 people attended. Turkey, pies, football on television, children running through hallways. The usual chaos. I arrived exactly at 3:14 p.m. The folder stayed in my car. I didn't bring it inside. Not yet. For 3 hours I watched, observed, listened. Ryan mentioned inheritance 5 times. Dad mentioned future planning 3 times. Mom referred to keeping assets together twice. Nobody spoke directly to me about any of it. Then dessert arrived, and Ryan stood. The room quieted. He tapped his glass, smiled, confident, comfortable, prepared. I want to thank Mom and Dad. Everyone looked up. Ryan continued. They've worked hard to ensure the family legacy stays protected for future generations. Nods around the table. Smiles. Agreement. Then he added something interesting. Especially with the property transition plans we've been discussing. Property transition plans. There it was. Not subtle anymore. Not accidental. Direct. Deliberate. I counted. 6 relatives nodded. 3 smiled. 2 congratulated him before anything official had even been announced. My father looked proud. My mother looked relieved. Ryan looked victorious. And suddenly I understood. The room assignments at the lake house. The meetings. The exclusions. The assumptions. They had already decided the outcome. Without checking the blueprint. Without reading the foundation. Without verifying the structure underneath. I stood. Slowly. Calmly. Nobody expected that. Emily was usually quiet. Reasonable. Predictable. I walked to my car, retrieved the folder, returned, and sat down again. The room watched, confused. Ryan smiled politely. What have you got there? I placed the folder on the table, then opened it. Before we talk about property transition plans, I said, I think we should review Grandpa Walter's actual instructions. Silence. Immediate. Heavy. My father's expression changed first. Not panic. Recognition. He knew exactly what folder it was. I removed the documents. Carefully. Methodically. Like blueprints. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Then the class. I read it aloud. Every word. No emotion. No anger. Just facts. When I finished, nobody spoke. Ryan blinked twice. My mother stared at the table. My father looked 10 years older. Finally, Ryan laughed. A short, forced laugh. That can't be right. I slid copies across the table. It is. More silence. Then came tactic number 1. Anger. Ryan leaned forward. You went digging through family records? I reviewed public documents. That's ridiculous. No. It's thorough. His jaw tightened. The room remained silent. Then came tactic number 2. Manipulation. Emily, this isn't about paperwork. It's about family. Interesting. Because moments earlier it had been about property. Now it was about family. I nodded. Grandpa made it about paperwork. Ryan didn't like that answer. Then came tactic number 3. Emotion. My mother began crying. Softly. Not dramatically. Just enough. I wanted everyone to stay close. I believed her. That's the difficult part. Good intentions can still create bad structures. I looked at Mom. I know. And I did. But intentions don't override legal documents. Then my father spoke. First time in nearly 10 minutes. His voice sounded tired. We thought it would be simpler. Simpler. Another interesting word. Simpler for whom? Certainly not me. Then someone unexpected spoke. My Aunt Linda. The wise one. The quiet one. The person who had called me. She set down her coffee cup, looked around the table, and said the sentence that changed everything. Walter spent 40 years teaching us that assumptions are not plans. Nobody argued, because everyone knew she was right. Ryan looked trapped, not by me, by facts. The difference matters. I wasn't attacking him. I was revealing measurements, dimensions, load calculations, reality. The room stayed quiet. Finally, my father exhaled. Long, slow, defeated. Then he admitted something. The family had been preparing documents to support Ryan's claim. Not fraud, not illegal, just selective presentation, convenient interpretation, missing context. But once the complete records appeared, the structure collapsed. Exactly like Grandpa always said it would. Truth eventually appears. The conversation lasted another hour. No shouting, no dramatic exits, just uncomfortable honesty. The best kind. By the end, several decisions were made. The estate review process restarted. Independent attorneys became involved. All documentation was reevaluated. Every page, every signature, every condition. 68 days later, the review concluded. The commercial property transferred according to Grandpa's instructions. Estimated value, $3.8 million. Ryan received other assets, significant ones. Nobody was left with nothing, but nobody received something they weren't entitled to either. The difference mattered. A lot. The strangest moment came 3 months later. Dad mailed me a letter, handwritten, 3 pages. At the bottom, he included one sentence. I should have noticed when we gave away your room. I stared at that sentence for a long time, because it wasn't really about a room. It never was. The room was simply the measurement, the visible crack, evidence of something larger underneath. Today, that letter sits in my desk drawer. next to an old photograph of Grandpa Walter standing beside a half-finished foundation, smiling, holding a blueprint. The property eventually became part of a commercial development partnership. The first lease agreement generated more income than Ryan's failed business had earned in years. But honestly, the money wasn't the victory. The clarity was. The blueprint was finally accurate, and accurate blueprints create stronger structures, family included. Ryan and I speak occasionally now, not often, but respectfully. My parents apologized, not once, several times. Real apologies, specific ones, the kind that acknowledge measurements instead of feelings. And every Thanksgiving since then has felt different, quieter, healthier, more honest. Because everyone remembers what happened when assumptions met documentation. Here's what I learned. People can argue with opinions. They can debate emotions. They can rewrite memories. But facts have a weight all their own. And eventually that weight settles exactly where it belongs. This is not revenge. This is arithmetic. If this story reminded you to know your worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one.